I find the world of sales interview questions to be absolutely fascinating. In my experience, this is something that many people get very, very wrong. Often we're trying to find out the wrong things. That's why you see really silly questions like, sell me this pen, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? They don't serve to tell us what we really need to know about the salesperson. Obviously, it's important to find out about their experience, it's important to find out about their targets that they've previously hit, or any achievements they've had in their career. Now, this is all very tangible stuff. We can look at their CV, or we can get them to send us a list of results that they've had. Now, there's a couple of bits that we need to understand that aren't as obvious in the interview stage, and that is coachability. It's really important to understand that their previous sales achievements have been achieved because of them. What do I mean by this? Well, as we know, when we're hiring salespeople, we've all gone through this experience where on paper they look absolutely perfect. They look like they can do the job because they've previously done it so well. And then we put them in the job and they really, really struggle. There's many reasons why salespeople can be successful. It might be the market they're selling into. It could be an incredibly good time to sell into that market. It could be a piece of legislation that favours their product, allows them to actually solve a problem that's market-wide for the client. It could be the product itself. Maybe the product is just really bloody good and people want to buy it without the salesperson being that good. So our objective is very, very simple. We want to make sure that their success is down to them. More specifically, the way that they learn, the way they analyse their own performance, and the way that they can incrementally improve what they do, as opposed to it being the success of the product or market that they sold into. So we're going to talk about questions specifically around coachability. Just a quick definition, coachability basically means the ability to be coached, which sounds pretty obvious. Well, why is that so important? Well, as we well know, that organisations that have a mature and well-operated coaching function see an enormous return on investment, particularly in the world of sales. The first question is, how do you think this interview went? Now, this seems like a really obvious question, but it's a great question because it gives us some insight into the candidate's own self-awareness. What it fundamentally shows us is how they can appraise themselves, how they can give feedback on themselves. It also shows us if there's a disconnect between their perception and the reality. Let me give you an example. If the salesperson or the candidate is saying, oh, this has been the greatest interview ever, I've been fantastic, I've performed so well, when they clearly haven't, this shows you that they're not very good at analysing their own performance. If they're honest and they say, well, actually, there's a couple of questions that I would have asked differently, or I probably would have answered this question in a different way, straight away, it's showing you that there's some congruency between how they think they've performed and how they've actually performed. And that in itself is really interesting because straight away, if there's some accuracy to that, you know that they're good at analysing their own performance. Well, why is that so important? Well, within sales, it's a fertile breeding ground for creating bad habits, doing the same thing again and again and again. Ideally, you want salespeople who can analyse their own performance, realise where they're going wrong, and implement that feedback on themselves to ultimately improve. Now we can get to see if they can prescribe themselves a strategy on what they could have done to have done it differently or done it better. This is a really revealing question because it gives you an understanding whether not only they can analyse their performance, whether they can identify a way of actually improving it. This question gives us an insight into that and is incredibly powerful. So let me give you an example. If the candidate said, well, one of the things I would have improved, I would have answered this question differently. Okay, cool. Let's learn about that. What would you have done differently? Well, I probably would have explained why I do this, 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 and this, and why this is so important and how it would help me do this, because I feel that this would have got me across better. That's perfect, because it tells us that they've identified a problem. They're telling you where they went wrong, and they're also saying they've got a solution to actually solving that problem. We're now talking about what fundamentally coaching is: identifying a problem within ourselves, thinking about that problem, coming up with a strategy to improve it, and then ultimately executing on that strategy. This one's always an interesting one, and people tend to shy away from it because they feel it's risky, but it's actually really, really important. Because what we're talking about here is something called metacognition, thinking about thinking. You're asking the salesperson to put themselves in your shoes and give you an analysis of their performance from your point of view. And that's incredibly powerful. And it gives us a couple of really interesting characteristics if they get it right. Number one, it shows that there's some empathy. Number two, it shows that they can think from a different position. They can analyse a problem from another angle, which is really important. And again, fundamental to sales, that's what we do. And lastly, it shows you they can do it quite quickly as well. If you ask them that question, it also shows a degree of vulnerability. They've got to give themselves some honest feedback from the perspective of you, which is always interesting to see in the interview environment. This one isn't a question, but it follows on from the theme of what we're talking about here. Now, if the candidate has given themselves any feedback whatsoever on what they would have done differently, make them do it. What do I mean by that? Well, if they say, well, I would have asked this question in this way, or when I did that role play, I would have done this, or I wish I'd asked you this question, just say to them, okay, great, let's do it. You've got another chance to do it. Let's do the role play again, or you can now ask me that question, or you can ask me that question in that way. The reason this is so important because you get to see how they now execute on their own feedback, how they can analyse their performance, give that feedback, and then make those changes in real time. Again, this is what coaching is. If they can do that quickly, accurately, with some degree of honesty about their own performance, it's a really, really good sign. Remember what coachability fundamentally is. If someone is coachable, you can coach them to do anything. Trapeze artist, juggler, or salesperson. A large part of a salesperson's day is spent dealing with objections. Now, where a lot of interviews go wrong is they create an artificial environment to see how the salesperson deals with that objection naturally, like a role play as an example. What we can do is we can create an environment where we give an objection without them realising it and see how they naturally tackle objections. A really good place to use this is when they're talking about their personal life. So most interviews have a part where they talk about what they get up to the weekend or what they enjoy outside of work. It's a really good way of you just slipping in an objection to see how they naturally deal with it. So as an example, if I said, what do you typically like doing at the weekends? And the candidate says, oh, I like going running, or I like going swimming, or I'm a massive hockey fan, or I'm a massive football fan. Disagree with them. Do you know what? I've spent a long time trying to get into hockey because all my friends are into it. I just don't like it. I find it really, really boring. See how they react. If they start asking you questions, that's really interesting. So what is it you find boring about it? What do you dislike? Or if they give you some interesting rebuttals, you know what I love about it is this, 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 and this. If you went to a game, I think you'd probably enjoy it. Whatever the case may be, if you start seeing how they naturally handle those objections, it's a really useful way of seeing how they can come across on the phone when they're dealing with those objections as well, or come across face to face. If they're combative and if they're kind of standoffish straight away, that's not a great trait. And we don't want to see them doing that in front of clients. Although we can coach them out of it or train it out of them, this is how they naturally approach those situations. Well, I hope that's been useful. Remember, try and find out about coachability in the interview stage. You can always find out about the rest of the stuff through role plays or contacting their former employers or getting them to bring in evidence of their past performance. But what you really want to see is, can you coach them? Well, as always, I hope this has been useful. Remember to subscribe, remember to like, feel free to share it with anyone that might find these questions as being valuable. And as always, happy selling, or in this case, happy interviewing.